guys, I'm back with little Sweefy. She wants to be in the video, because we're going to talk about women's changing roles now. So I'm on page 186. I figured it was just fair, since I want you to try to finish up to page 188 by the end of today, that I read the rest of the pages to you and help you with the questions. Alrighty? So I'm going to start on page 186. Women's changing roles. Did you want to say hi to everybody? Say hi. You say hi? Oh, isn't she so sweet? Isn't she so cute? Okay, you get down. Okay. So now I'm going to be reading on page 186. The conflict between modern and traditional values in the 1920s also found expression in the contradictory roles of women. So contradictory means that they go against each other. Women in the workforce. Throughout the 1920s, the number of women in the workforce increased steadily. By 1930, 10.7 million women were working outside the home, making up 22% of the workforce. Most working women were single, widowed, or divorced. Widowed means that their husband had died. Oh, Lord, Chloe. While by 1930, about 1 in 6 married women worked more than ever before. 90% continued to remain home. By 1930, women earned 40% of the bachelor's degrees awarded. So that's a degree in college. Many of them became teachers, nurses, and social workers, traditional female occupations. Fewer than 20% worked in the better paying skilled factory jobs. Changes in technology and scientific management created opportunities for women in white collar and service industry jobs. These low paying, low status, and low mobility occupations included work as secretaries, salespeople, telephone operators, and beauticians. Because these jobs were labeled female only, even in hard times, women were able to be hired for these and other new occupations. One important gain for working women was the creation in 1920 of the Women's Bureau, part of the Federal Department of Labor. It tried to improve working conditions for women from inside the government and provided data about working women. Sorry. Improvement in politics. In 1920, women voted in a national election for the first time. However, their vote did not have a distinctive effect on the outcome. Women did not vote in large numbers, nor did they vote as a block. So that means when you vote as a block, they think that a certain group of people will all vote the same way. To encourage women to play a greater part in politics, the National American Women's Suffrage Association reorganized itself as the Nonpartisan League of Women Voters. Stop it. Sorry. Health, rights, and working conditions. The divisions of the 1920s were reflected in the fate of 2 pieces of legislation. Stop. It's kind of like Daniel and Sebastian just talking along with Josh all the time. Encouraged by women reformers, Congress passed the Shepard-Towner Act in 1921 with the aim of reducing infant mortality. The law provided for public health centers where women could learn about nutrition and health care. The program came to an end in 1920, largely because of opposition from the American Medical Association. Thank you, employee, for handling the boss. An equal rights amendment to the Constitution proposed by Alice Paul in 1923 led to bitter disagreement among women. Many feminists supported it, but other feminists opposed it because they believed it would do away with special laws protecting female workers. Daily life. Contrary to the image of the flapper, women were still restricted by economic, political, and social limits. In some ways, technology made life easier in the 1920s, especially for middle-class women. With electric washing machines, vacuum cleaners, stoves, and refrigerators, household chores did not require so much time, and there was less need for servants. On the other hand, typical homemaker now was expected to handle almost all the household tasks herself and to meet higher standards of cleanliness. Emphasis on wife rather than mother. The role of the woman as wife received increased importance. Women did have more choices in life. Families changed during this period, and divorce and family planning became more acceptable. However, divorce laws continued to favor men, and wives were expected to stay at home rather than work outside the home. Family size decreased. Only about 20% of women who married during the 1920s had 5 or more children. The family, which in earlier times had been a producing unit, growing and processing much of its food, was now a consuming unit. Marketing and advertising appeals flooded the media, encouraging consumers to buy more goods. Constitutional and legal issues. Major constitutional and legal issues divided Americans in the 1920s. Many issues reflected the struggle between modern and traditional values and showed how international affairs affected domestic policies and attitudes. For some Americans, these tensions took the form of nativism, racism, and intolerance of differences in religion and politics. Threats to civil liberties. Remember, civil liberties are freedoms that people enjoy. In the 1920s, the Red Scare and the Ku Klux Klan exploited fears about people who were considered un-American, often threatening their civil liberties, their freedoms. The Red Scare. The imposition of stern measures to suppress dissidents after World War I in a crusade against internal enemies was known as the Red Scare. It was fueled by the November 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, an uprising of communists in China. In the United States, communists made up only 0.5% of the population, but many of them were targeted by the crackdown, as were various other groups viewed as un-American. Among them were socialists, anarchists, labor leaders, and foreigners. The Red Scare was led by Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer, so they're going to call them the Palmer Raids. It was sparked by several events that took place after the war ended. Race riots erupted in more than 25 cities. In Boston, a series of labor strikes climaxed with a walkout by the police. Several unexplained bombings added to the hysteria. All these events were seen as part of a communist conspiracy. Ooh. The Attorney General ordered the first so-called Palmer Raids late in 1919. In 33 cities, police without warrants raided the headquarters of communists and other organizations. Eventually, they arrested more than 4,000 people, holding them without charges and denying them legal counsel. Some 560 aliens were deported. Palmer's extreme actions and statements soon turned the public against him. However, the Red Scare had lingering effects, discouraging many Americans from speaking their minds freely in open debate, thus squelching or squeezing their constitutional right to freedom of speech. Sacco and Vanzetti, we talked about this case in an earlier assignment when we were together. Closely linked to the Red Scare was the case of Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti. These two Italian immigrants, admitted anarchists, were convicted of murder in 1921 in connection with a Massachusetts robbery. Many people questioned the evidence against Sacco and Vanzetti, concluding that the two men were convicted for more for their beliefs and their Italian origin than for a crime. In spite of mass demonstrations and appeals, the two men were executed in 1927. The governor of Massachusetts eventually cleared the two men in 1977, some 50 years later. the KKK. Anti-foreign attitudes encouraged a revival, so it means it's coming back, of the KKK. The first organization active during Reconstruction had died out in the late 1800s. A reorganized Klan formed in 1915 grew slowly until 1920 when it added 100,000 members. In 1925, membership peaked at 2 million, endorsing nativist beliefs and policies. The Klan of the 1920s targeted not only African Americans, but also Catholics, Jews, and immigrants. To the Klan, the only true Americans were white, Protestant, and American born. All right, restrictions on immigration. So we talked a little bit about this in previous chapters. The nativism expressed in the Red Scare, the Sacco-Vanzetti case, and the New Klan was also evident in the 1920s immigration legislation. Immigration had resumed after World War I, but there was less of a need for workers. In the post-war recession, immigrants were seen as taking jobs from returning soldiers and somehow threatening American values. The nativist climate led to Immigration Act of 1924. This act established a system of national quotas, which limited the number of immigrants from each country. These quotas deliberately kept the totals for Eastern and Southern Europe low and excluded, so did not allow, any immigrants from Asia. Prohibition. All right, so the graph below that is about the immigration, okay? Prohibition. Both the rebirth of the Klan and the movement to restrict immigration reflected the struggle of the 1920s between what some saw as old, rural American values and the new values of a changing urban industrialized culture. However, the clash between these two sets of values did not divide on the basis of where one lived. For example, the temperance movement working for prohibition, a ban on the sale and consumption of alcoholic beverages, was not confined to rural America, though it received much support there. The 18th Amendment allowing prohibition became part of the Constitution in 1919. Congress passed the Volstead Act to implement prohibition, but the law turned out to be unenforceable. So they couldn't enforce it. People kept breaking the law left and right, and it created a lot of crime, and so they could not enforce it. Most Americans were simply unwilling to accept a total ban on alcohol. Furthermore, it stimulated crime, encouraging smuggling and bootlegging, the illegal manufacture and sale of alcoholic beverages. In 1933, the 21st Amendment ending prohibition was ratified. And finally, the Scopes Trial. In 1925, the Scopes Trial, held in Dayton, Tennessee, received nationwide attention because it pitted the scientific ideas of Darwin evolution against the Protestant fundamentalist view of biblical creationism. John Scopes, a biology teacher, had deliberately violated a state law forbidding anyone to teach the theory of evolution. Scopes was represented by a famous trial lawyer, Clarence Darrow. The prosecution relied on the assistance of William Jennings Bryan, a 3-time presidential candidate and firm believer in fundamentalist Christianity. Although Scopes was convicted and fined $100, Bryan's confused testimony weakened fundamentalist arguments. All right, so let's see what I assigned for you guys and gals. All right, so 184. We already did 184. Okay. So 185. We already did 185. So then the next is not until page 188. Key themes and concepts. Immigration and migration during the 1920s. Immigration from the Western Hemisphere was not limited. Large numbers of Mexicans moved into southwestern cities, and Puerto Ricans moved into New York City, most in search of economic opportunities. What are the most dramatic changes pictured on the chart on the right? So you got to look at the chart, And yeah, see where the most drastic changes. So the dark gray is 1921. The light gray is 1926, after all those laws were passed. So whose immigration is going to change the most? Look at how many people came in from Southern Europe in 1921. Then you get all those laws after the war, and look at how few come in now, okay? So there's help for that answer. You can always pause it, rewind it, and go back and listen to my explanation if you need help. All right, what changes were made to immigration laws in the 1920s and why? Well, up here, we just read about that, okay? Talks about the 1920s. People did not need workers anymore. So remember when we talked about immigration during the Industrial Revolution, immigrants came over because companies needed workers. Now they don't need those workers. Plus, people were very scared that immigrants were going to take jobs, that they were going to try to overthrow our government. Okay? Alrighty. So now you should go back to page 177 and page 178 and try to answer those questions. If you need help on those questions, so on page 177, the unit overview questions, and then page 178, the key themes and concepts questions, okay? If I see that you guys do really well on these, then I might not make you do as many side questions because it is a lot. But I want you guys to make sure you have this information. So let me see what you guys hand in over the weekend, and then things could change for Monday's assignment, okay? Everybody have a good weekend. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.